I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the postseason, preseason, off-season, anytime basketball podcast. I'm Ben Dietrich. Jordan Rodelli is back on vacation. Fortunately, Earl Boykins, a.k.a. Andrew Quo, is dutifully sitting in his chair. What's up, buddy?
I never left. I just after the last great pod with our good friend Kat Marnell wrapped up, I just closed my eyes and I just opened them again, and here I am potting again.
Have you been potting this entire time?
Yes. I've been maybe potting perfectly this entire time. We haven't been recording, but it's been like a steady uptick of perfect takes and everything right.
Practicing potting makes perfect, as I've often heard. They weren't with you potting in the gym.
I was the last one there, so how would you know?
So you've been just potting for, at this point, 5 days straight and honing your takes to a razor's edge, I'm sure.
This is sort of like Morse code. I just pod perfectly the whole time, and then Cookies just record segments of it.
Well, it's good that you're here because we've lost the other two from the quartet of last episode, which was really fun. And Cookies correspondent Kat Marnell was joining us for a lot of NBA gossip, some of which was redacted by the sex cops, but that was a lot of fun. And now it's just back us two. And I gotta say, I'm a little wistful. You know, I wish we had the whole gang here.
I know, it's like the end of summer. It's the last week of summer. You kind of look back on your summer and your life, maybe, and you're just like, have I done this right? Did I eat enough delicious food? Did I take enough disgusting New York City subway rides? Did I hang with my friends enough? I don't know. These questions will never be asked or answered.
Is this something that you've sort of delved into and experienced your entire life? Because it sounds like the very sort of academic, scholastic, elementary school era wistfulness where you've been frolicking in rivers and streams and running city streets and, I don't know, going to raves. And I'm trying to think what else happened in like the plot to Kids that isn't like totally gruesome. But that would be your summer experience, and now you're going to be tethered to a school desk and doing homework for the next 8 months.
Just potting straight for 8 months.
Is this how you feel about summer? You're like, have I used it wisely enough?
Yeah, so like both my parents were extremely wistful people by profession, and they warned me when I was a kid, being like, you're a little too wistful. Like, we know what you're doing. We see you. And this move is not going to work out good for you. Fast forward to me being an adult, and they were right.
They were wistful by profession?
They were both writers, so they both like kind of wrote like stuff about the summer, and like my dad wrote like a novel about his mom, and like all they did was mine for like this thing, and they were just like, you're trying to do this thing. We know all about this thing. Don't do the thing.
They were just trying to harvest whist.
They were whist harvesters. If the turbine goes backwards, you can delete it. You become not wistful.
So would you say that you adequately utilized this summer?
I think so, man. Like, I never put my air conditioner below 80. I watched all the shows. I ate as much food as I could. It gets really expensive, man, especially like when you keep on trying new things, because rent is so high in New York City. Like, people have to charge you $4 for a slice of pizza now. Yes,
that's true. But let me just go back to this AC thing that you mentioned here. You
like it icy.
But I'm so icy. But your AC doesn't go beneath 80. That's just freakish.
Yeah, and it's not like an ethical thing about the environment or CO2. Things like Cookies cares about, but I'm just cheap. I think like 80 is good enough. I have 2 very furry cats, and I worry about them. So I kind of keep it around 80, 81, 82 constantly. It's cold enough, man. Why? Where are you at?
Well, I don't.
That sounded very accusatory.
Well, absolutely. It's just bonkers. I saw that thing going around Twitter the other day where they were saying the optimal temperature for sleeping on your thermostat was 82 degrees, and that's just that's outlandish.
Oh, there was that strange article about like climate change and how the CO2 emissions from certain degrees of air conditioners would like set it back, and we will always be sweating. If you're ethical, you will always be sweating in your bed. And I was like, but don't people burn at different temperatures? Like I burn kind of hot. I sweat all the time. I sweat while I eat. I sweat while I pod. I just want it more.
Look, cookies is nothing if not ethical, and if there is a cookies creed and code that we subscribe to. I'm also not going to sleep in a hot-ass room if I have the choice. And if that means that my carbon footprint expands slightly or enlarges a little bit via me putting my thermostat to 68 degrees, I'll have to live with that. But,
can I ask you some late night cookies questions?
Yes.
If your room is icy while you sleep, what is your blanket situation?
Not heavy. I like the icy room. It should be cold. I feel like health-wise, comfort, a nice cold room, so you can use a blanket if you want to. If it's hot, you just can't use a blanket. That's disgusting.
Do you believe in like that core temperature stuff, like that? What is it? Like that restaurant Suen doesn't serve ice in their water. It's like this homeopathic kind of core temperature vibe.
Yes, I believe in that thoroughly. It's the only thing I actually believe in is keeping my core temperature at 68 degrees. That's the only way that the takes stay so icy.
All right, well, you've convinced me, man. I've been doing it wrong.
And how my cold takes get exposed.
But yeah, you don't get wistful about the summer, or we're in the last week of it, and you don't.
No,
look back.
I can't stand the summer.
What? What are you talking about? You had a great summer.
No, summer's fine. I can't wait for it to get over. I don't like walking around. I'm a walker. I love
I know this about you.
trotting the sidewalks of New York City, and in summer I don't enjoy doing it because it's so gross. Your shirt is adhered to your body. You're just disgusting all the time. You need to shower 4 times a day instead of once every 4 days.
Like prison.
Doing this little bird bath. But no, it's disgusting and I hate it. So I get the lovable elements of summer, the trips, the warm weather, the roof beers, etc. Like all that stuff. But man, I'm ready for fall.
Is it boomer of me to love the summer because most of the people that I know go away and you can actually walk streets and there's tourists here for sure, but the volume is nothing like what it is in the fall, winter, and spring. In August, New York City is kind of maybe 60% as populated on the streets, and it feels like our own again, we're taking it back. Is that boomer?
No, because I think there are certain moments when the city feels abandoned, and the summer is a prolonged moment of that ilk. Christmas or Memorial Day, Labor Day. There are certain weekends when everyone flees who can, and the city is kind of, as you said, left to the orphans, the people who don't have somewhere in the Hamptons to go. And there's an interesting sort of dynamic in the city that isn't there when it's just popping off. Yeah,
and it's not necessarily a good thing because I like when everyone's here, but it feels like I've been in the city for Thanksgiving and Christmas every time for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've grown to really love it, even though you're just kicking Veselka's tires again, being are you guys serving Thanksgiving dinner? There's a melancholy to it that is wistful, that my parents are just you're getting this wrong, man. Don't be wistful, be psyched.
There is a distinct wistfulness to Christmas in New York City because of the fact that it's just utterly empty, and and you wouldn't really understand that if you haven't been here. You'd think that it was normal, but it's not. It's very weird looking around for places where you can get a beer and then finding a congregation of people like we would at like Max Fish or Lit on Christmas Eve. And it's really fun and weird and a totally different night than you would experience almost any other evening of the year.
Super weird. And like, that's where the people hoarding Chinatown started, because like there was nowhere to eat food, and like Chinatown is open because Chinese people are always ready for work, and like
Just an industrious people.
they don't observe our false god.
It's odd that, I go on vacation, Jordan goes on vacation, and you're just sitting in your seat honing takes to a razor sharp edge while we're gone. There's something different.
and also honing TV takes, because I'm just like saddled watching these long shows, man, like 15-hour shows, just binging them all throughout August.
Yeah, I did a little binging lately. I was on a plane and I binged.
Must be nice.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't working. I was on a plane. What do you think? What do you think I have some sort of Chinese work ethic here? Get real.
Beijing ducks, baby.
We're gonna talk about Jeremy Lin's work ethic. We're gonna get to that.
Oh,
I know
man.
you're chomping at the bit to talk about that. But yeah, so I caught up on Mindhunter, and my problem here is I've never seen anything that is discussed, and if Jordan is on vacation, I've got to watch something, and Mindhunter was it. I saw the first season and I enjoyed it. I thought it was an intriguing version of the police procedural serial killer genre, and it's set in the late 70s, and it deals with a unit of the FBI who is in the formative days of discovering what serial killers are and what makes them tick, and they use the knowledge they glean from interviews with famous murderers to solve active investigations. Cool show. David Fincher is the producer. It has that woozy, dimly lit aesthetic that like Zodiac had. It's
Social
brooding. Yeah, it's brooding. It's a bit slow moving, but I really enjoyed the first season. And the second season I thought was pretty good. No spoilers, except that the Mindhunter dad cop
Yeah, you got it right. Go on.
just becomes insanely stupid and like the worst cop in the world in a way that is sort of distracting, where you're just groaning when he just makes poor decisions over and over and over. And I think it's a bit accelerated when you binge it, because you're just seeing him be stupid for like repeatedly for 5 hours straight, versus watching it on a weekly basis and then recalling that he's distracted and doing dumb shit. So you just watch him as if it's like Homer Simpson in Police Cops, just be like, uh-oh, spaghetti-o, and just bumbling repeatedly.
See, I before you even mentioned, I had not noticed that, because I even thought you would enjoy his character, because like he represents, like he has to represent the boomer part of it, and Holden, like the main character, has his own flaws and his own frustrations when you watch him, but he kind of lurches forward in a different way that this bumbling cop does, who's older, and like from clearly, like even when you look at him, like, oh, he's used as a device to talk about the resistance, right? The resistance back to the norm.
Yes, but I felt like in the first season, and I could be remembering it incorrectly, but that he was kind of on board. He's part of this unit. This is what they do. And then in the second season, it's like he went back to being someone who didn't believe in this shit. It was very like Mulder and Scully, where there's the foil of the boomer, but they already, I don't know. The show is just so interested in the bureaucratic elements of investigation and the meticulousness of how they talk about, getting paperwork done or getting invoices. And I'm like, this is so intentionally meticulous and plotting that when you have someone just be stupid and forget the fundamentals of what's happened on the show to this point, it's a bit jarring.
Wow, look who's the results guy over here. I mean, I think it's an almost perfect show, but it's not for everyone or even me when I'm in a certain mood, but I think it is like a fully completed thought. I love Zodiac. I love all of his movies, and he gave an interview once where he talked about a really like a motif he was obsessed with, which was in a Madonna video that he directed early in his career. He had a clock going backwards, and it seemed like a regular thing when you watch it in real time. It's like, oh, cool, that's just like a fairy tale. You know, we've seen that thing, that image a lot. But he talks about it in terms of like filmmaking and his obsession, and Benjamin Button was about that. If you look closer, like even the Zodiac is about that. It kind of like restructures time in a way that he claims that he's really interested in. And I love the idea of detail and, for lack of a better word, the procedure of storytelling. And maybe it is about, you know, Holden's apartment rather than like this is a whole Barton Fink thing, right? Like the room becomes like his brain, and it's a very intentional thing, and I find this to be really enjoyable. And this character that you're talking about that has issues in this new season, no spoilers, but what goes on in his family is probably the most interesting part of this season.
I think I respect and enjoy the inconsistency of the show in terms of its shifting focus, where the first season talked a lot about Holden, whatever the Mindhunter dude is, talked a lot about his home life, and it dealt sort of with his sexual experiences and his girlfriend at the time. And then that just doesn't exist in season 2. And
well, you go into the other characters are kind of revealed, right?
Right. So that's what I mean. It's like they'll focus on something and then just get rid of it. And two of the characters this season are essentially just abandoned, other than having the woman who came down, who is an expert on, you know, the psychological element. She only has out of the office plots, and the other guy, who was kind of a snitch, basically doesn't exist. So it's a weird pivot where they didn't really even do much interviewing this season. That was kind of the rhythm they got into that I really enjoyed about the first season, was when they would interview famous murderers and then use that information to solve active crimes. They don't really do that this much.
Were you ever a fan of like dance music or like ambient music, or did you like dance music? Like, did you buy house CDs and stuff?
No, but I kind of get where you're going, that this is about the journey and the friends you make along the way.
But it's like vibey, right? Like, it's true. Zodiac is painfully long, and we're redefining what we watch, right? Because this is basically like a 12-hour Zodiac, and
Yes.
if you combine the first season, it's like, God, is this like 24 hours of like plotting procedural stuff? And it ceases to become entertainment in the way that you're just like, shut up and give me the hits, right? And that's why I bring up ambient music, right?
No, I get that, but I can't tell with Zodiac if they're good at this or if they're doing a thing.
Oh my God, he's so good at it. What do you mean?
I don't know, because there is this sort of edging denialism here where they won't give you the scene you want, and they just keep like the tension going and the plot going and give you this repetition, as you said, that's very vibey. And I'm like, is that good writing or not? I can't tell. Like, why aren't we getting this scene? Why aren't we getting the dialogue that needs to be said? Why is everything just so similar and redundant over and over in a way? Like, why wasn't there a conversation or a good conversation about why this cop was fucking up repeatedly, the boomer cop? Like,
well, we don't need an answer. Like, this is the whole issue, right? Like, I mean, I think we've talked about this at length before with Jordo. It's like the Gus Van Sant had a trilogy with this idea. I believe it was Elephant, the Kurt Cobain one, Last Days, and Jerry, where he kind of presents this new way of telling a story, which is like there's nothing and nothing is answered, but these movies are 2 hours long. And I think similarly, like movies like A Thin Red Line, you know, Days of Heaven, like these are kind of like wistful movies that There we go, the W word. But these are movies that like operate and kind of like try to connect with you in a different way. Like someone asked me yesterday what my favorite things I've seen this year were. And it's hard because like my brain just thinks of the most recent thing. But I immediately just blurted out Fleabag, Mindhunter, and Lost as Spookies. And all for different reasons, and they all function so differently. But Mindhunter to me is like kind of unfuckwithable. Like, he intended to do this thing, he did it, and it might not be for everybody, but it feels like a fully formed thought.
Yeah, see, I can't tell. I think that's the root of my mild discontent, despite the fact that I liked it and enjoyed it and would watch it. I'll watch it again the next time around. I think it's good, and there are elements that I really like about that vibiness to it, and it's got really good scoring. It looks good. There are things I really enjoy, but I can't tell if they're actually good at it. That's to me the fulcrum, because there are times when they won't give you that excruciating scene that you really want. And I don't even mean that it's fan service. They don't give you like that brutal, insane scene that you're like, wow, I can't believe that just happened, or we knew this was coming and it came in this direction.
But I don't want that, right? Like, that ruins the whole thing.
But right. I understand that idea too. But also, like, how are they sloppy? Because they mentioned the tunnel. And the tunnel didn't open for 4 or 5 years after 1981, which is like the one about the Atlanta child murderers could have occurred. You know, like, they fucked that up. They mentioned they had a white man can't jump joke. I'm like, this is stupid.
I love it. No, I love it because and those things are very intentional, because Fincher has attention to detail, and they are doing a thing that they know people can Google or just know right when they see it. But this is like a retelling of a story. Like, I still haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because I'm mostly scared of that Bruce Lee scene. But people were annoyed that she wasn't a main part of it, and I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming you don't see the murders. And we have to remember that this isn't a documentary. This is an artistic thing with license, right? Like, he's doing a thing. And
but that's what I'm saying. It's like, I know he's doing a thing. There's this brooding meticulousness to it. But then how are you going to fuck up and have a character say that they were like in the tunnel when the tunnel opened in 1985?
I mean, I may be reaching here, but this goes back to my whole backwards clock thing. He's not talking about moving back in time, even though Benjamin Button was literally about a movie about moving back in time. He's talking about constructing a story and changing the way time unfolds or whatever, you know.
I guess.
I mean,
that sounds like a stretch, Quo.
But are you looking for truth here?
No, but I'm not even trying to be that guy, the one who's like, there's a continuity error and there's a Starbucks cup. I'm not saying that. It's more.
But you're literally saying that.
But I'm saying it because of the meticulousness. If we're supposed to take this show seriously, and we're supposed to say this slow pace, this unraveling where they get into clerical shit about paperwork, and we're supposed to be like affected by that, because instead of giving us fan service, they're keeping it true to the story. How are you bungling details?
Well, this is the question in 2019, or maybe in the last 20 years, of like op-ed, right? Journalism and op-ed. I think that's a nice way to frame it, because we see journalism as a pursuit of truth. But now, like, we have doubts about that, and the whole idea of op-ed has kind of replaced journalism, where we kind of pay more attention to takes and people's feelings about things, because I think we assume we know the truth, but we actually don't, because everything is within a lens of someone's point of view. Like, AI is not scared because we created it. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, this strikes close to home because Cookies is a purveyor of both ethics and fake news. So we really split the difference here. And I will say, when you mentioned AI, I thought you were going another direction.
What? I was going to talk about the first basketball player drafted into the NBA.
Thank you, sire. I appreciate that.
But do you know what I mean? Like, so if you're reading an op-ed, it's easy to forget that we're watching a TV show made by someone with a point of view. So if you're reading an op-ed being like, oh, they have it all wrong, how could the New York Times be talking about this? And I'm like, oh, whoa, oh, this is just someone they hire with their own opinion. Like, you have to parse these things in real time, and and you're right 100% in that it only works if you believe it, and you didn't believe it.
Well, speaking of the New York Times op-ed page, Brett Stevens, a conservative columnist, made news in the last day or two because he was apparently name searching himself, and he found a tweet that was comparing him to a bed bug, and it was not a popular tweet. I think it had 9 likes and no retweets. And he took it upon himself to contact the professor at GW University who had written the tweet, and he also CC'd the provost at the university, which is the guy's boss. And then that professor, he had a good name. It was like David Karp was his name. he publicized on Twitter that letter, and it went viral. So
Who's the cop here?
Brett Stevens is the cop.
Yeah, but then your boy Karp, produced it as evidence that he is not a cop, but therefore snitching on Brett Stevens, right?
I mean, Stevens is the cop. He tried to. I mean, he snitched. He tried to get the guy fired.
True. And he's done this before, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so snitchy. It's crazy. It's Donovan Mitchell level shit.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's fully insane. And whatever, people respond the way they do to the internet, and then he ended up deleting his account.
Right.
As a result, and he, discussed how the vulgarity of the internet and it's a cesspool and Twitter and all this kind of stuff, and then denied on TV that he was trying to get the guy fired. But just a really amazing turn of events for someone who has made decorum and freedom of speech on college a big part of his public persona and his brand, to then attack a professor for saying something as innocuous as calling him a bedbug was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and this is my whole gripe with the idea of the internet, and even it's better if I frame it around the idea of karma, and we've talked about this too. It's when does karma begin or end? Wherever the person who brings it up first decides it does. So, the Lakers lost Kawhi Leonard to the Clippers, and we have Lakers friends who are like, oh, karma's going to bite them in the ass. I'm like, no, karma begins much earlier than that. This is the actual karma. Maybe because I'm starting at a certain place. And who is the bigger snitch? Who is being the bigger troll? It's easy for someone like Brett Stevens to come out and say, look at this messed up place that we've created. I'm like, oh, dude, you helped create this messed up place. Where are we starting with it? And this writer at the New Yorker put out this book called Trick Mirror, Gia Tolentino, and she's doing a press cycle around this now. And she talks about this exact phenomena about how some people use the internet as a response mechanism to kind of create their own brand. And the whole branding system based off of your ideas is a flawed one, and she rejects the premise of it, being your ideas are not who you are, but that's what we're bartering in now. And she's not even negative about it. She kind of claims it she claims her idea in terms of just be better, be a good hangout. You don't go to a bar to meet your friend and accuse them of doing stuff just to gaslight them, right?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that discussion we had a few weeks ago about, does your output on social media represent you as a person, and
the totality of that output,
right? And can you compartmentalize things? But the interesting thing with the Brett Stevens and the writer is that, the professor, is that Brett Stevens clearly wanted the message he was trying to send was that you can't just say stuff online and there not be ramifications. That was what he was trying to emphasize. And he did it in a way that, of course, ended up burning himself. And I feel like that's kind of that's an interesting dynamic of the internet. How much responsibility do you have for what you say? Do you have to go and fist fight someone because you said that Kobe was overrated? Where do your ideas separate from yourself as a person?
Yeah, God, when you said fist fight, it reminded me of that Idris Elba clip that's going around where he has the hot chicken wings, right? And stay with me here. Let's imagine like the hot chicken wings is like a troll on the internet. And the clip that was the going around is like him being like, "What the fuck? What is this?" Right? And it cuts out at that, and people use it for their own jokes. But then the rest of the clip, he turns like, whose idea was this? And the guy was like, "Oh, the producer over there." And he looks over at the producer and he goes, "Do you know how to fight?" And I thought that was such an interesting thing that was left out, right? Because it brings it back into like, it brings it back into a different context, being like, would you say that to me in person? Like, how come you're not sitting across from me watching me suffer? You're behind some glass, like laughing at me. Come here and give me chicken wings to my face,
But that's a huge part of the internet, that dynamic of like anonymity and would you say that to my face? Those are the two biggest, I guess, hurdles that prevent the internet from being real life. It's like, if I'm like, "You're a fucking idiot" to someone, they're like, "Well, you wouldn't call me a fucking idiot right here." And you're like, "Maybe I would," but you wouldn't, because like we treat people differently in person than we do online.
Yeah, and it goes the other way too. It's just like, "You're a king, you're a queen." It's like, "I love you so much." And when you see them, you're just like, "Oh yeah, I was just doing that thing before I cooked dinner for my family. And it's cool, nice to meet you." And we react differently. And of course, like, it made me think about NBA Twitter quite a bit, and how like we're quick to jump. Well, let me backtrack. We're quick to jump at the internet as a bad thing sometimes. And I always try to force myself to look at the internet through a lens of like pleasure and enjoying the thing. And a new study came out so predictably, right? You know how all this wellness stuff says like screen time might be bad for you, and especially for your kids and young brains growing up.
What about the horns that are sprouting from the back of my skull because my head has been bowed towards a digital device for too long? Is that something I should be concerned about, or should I start adjusting my hats?
Well, this report would say there are no horns, dude. The people who have the most interactions on the internet and with the most texts and screen time end up being maybe healthier than the people who don't, like the kids growing up, and they don't express like thoughts of like depression or anxiety as much, because the researchers can only conclude that social interaction is actual interaction with people, and we are social creatures. And like most social creatures in the world, like the ones who can navigate the territory of conversation end up kind of on the end of not anxious or depressed.
I think there's probably some truth to that interacting with other people in any format has positive attributes. I also would say that we're starting to see, it's been ongoing, but we're starting to see the real ramifications of the way that certain communities online are radicalized and how they are compartmentalized and how they are calcified. And we're seeing that with white supremacy. We've seen that with like ISIS and just the process of like
before you go on with that,
cetera.
Before you go on with that, like I have doubts about that idea, because there aren't a large number of places where these people talk. Like they keep on getting shut down. Like 8chan, Twitch kind of eliminated all the white supremacist chat rooms. Like it's hard for them to be online because people find them and police it, right?
Look, this could be a temporary phenomenon, or maybe not temporary, but it could change because, to your point, we've had a lot of tech companies who were loath to shut down the way that people communicated. And now that we've seen those platforms being used to foment horrific acts and violence and hatred, maybe there's more attention to it. And tech companies were very libertarian previously, but not everyone has to be. Like countries like Germany don't allow necessarily YouTube to put up the same kind of content that they're allowed to in the United States.
Your silence about China is complicit, right? It's like no one's talking about Hong Kong. Shame on you. Yeah, but this has to do with censorship in Hong Kong in a point of view. Totally. North Korea, all that stuff.
So, right. I don't know what ultimately, how those interactions will play out. Will it be easy to recruit for a terrorist organization, whether it's, as I said, white supremacist or ISIS or whatever? Will that be easy to do online, or will it get increasingly more difficult? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the movement you're talking about and the movement Gia Tolentino's talking about, I think, is true. And it needs to be kind of like viewed with some nuance. And it's difficult for me to even parse as I'm using the thing, but I really shy away from the internet is bad a narrative. Like, oh, we're going wellness, go out and like run through some grass and sit under a tree. I'm like, those things are very nice, but also like me and you talk on the internet all the time and I really enjoy it. You know, like these are good things in my life. And I think NBA Twitter, I've found a pocket that is pretty great. Like no one's being weird or antagonistic. It's a place that's like backed up by stats and facts, and people are willing to change their minds, and I have no problems with it. And if something goes wrong, I just mute it. And I think what Gia Tolentino is saying in her book is that if we are the best versions of our internet selves, then few things can go wrong then. The internet is not inherently bad. It can be if you are bad.
Well, okay, that I understand, and it's not different from non-digital life in that regard, but how did you tie this to NBA Twitter? That's where I'm trying to do, because this is a basketball podcast, and now
we're entering the basketball portion of our podcast.
At some point, we're going to have to tie this into basketball, and this may be an opportunity.
It's like, can I talk about R.J. Barrett in terms of the trick mirror? But yes, you could. But where I was going with this is like, I believe there's certain pockets on the internet, obviously, and you don't have to be the totality of your opinions as a human being on the internet. And I think like I very much concentrate on NBA Twitter just as a realm in which I just want to exist and not worry about politics or anything too heavy. And
I think you're just trying to identify with the interns.
Unfortunately, I like more gruel as opposed to less gruel, so we'll always have that rift. But I think NBA Twitter behaves in a way that reminds me of those like classic debates. But I love how it's informed by just like the games people have played, and we can talk about a simple thing like championships or something as complicated as like a newfangled advanced metric stat. Like there's ways to discuss this thing that is not purely fueled by feelings.
I've noticed that there are certainly different sects to NBA Twitter where there isn't that much overlap, surprisingly, because we're all talking about basketball. So you have people who are into metrics. You have people who are sort of reserved and not fiery and just kind of discuss topics. And then you have people who are really dedicated to specific teams, who have a sort of an animosity in some ways towards like the national guys, but they're really, really focused on the beat writers for their team or the local, even like radio station or whatever. And it's odd because I don't really have that much interaction with those guys, despite the fact that I tweet a lot about like the Sixers. But I don't have interactions with a lot of just sort of like regular Sixers fans. I do with plenty, but there are other writers who have a totally different kind of fan base from the same team. It's kind of interesting. And I don't know. This ties a little bit to this report that the Golden State Warriors' new scoreboard in their San Francisco arena is going to put up advanced metrics. And there's a real schism between the eye test and metrics guy that's still going on in basketball. And I feel like this is one of the first kind of nods to the nerdy side of metrics, that they're going to put up things like turnover percentage and offensive rating on the scoreboard during games.
I mean, it's going to be really jarring when a substitution comes in and maybe fans will be able to see the efficiency of that lineup on the court. Like, here comes Draymond Green, like, ooh, we're cooking. Like, the point differential has changed. And then here comes Willie Cauley-Stein, we're like, oh, we're in big trouble. Like it's letting people behind the curtain a little bit, and I love it. Let's do it. Let's make a new curtain. Let's give everyone the same information, and it's going to take years to accept it.
Okay, yeah. So I feel like we've watched No Sin Bin baseball go through a lot of these same growing pains, whether it was Joe Morgan being vehemently opposed to advanced metrics, and then you see this shift of personnel in front offices, and there's some teams who still remain ahead of the curve and other ones who remain plodding behind. But in general, a tidal change in the way that basketball views numbers, and fans in turn do the same. So maybe it's just time. But the NBA hasn't really, from a casual fan point of view, and from the way that the content is delivered to fans, like via TNT or ESPN, really embraced any new stat except for maybe like plus minus, which isn't a good one.
Yeah, we should probably leave that one alone.
Right, so you'll see plus minus and it will be referred to, and every now and then you'll see per, which is like a weird one, and I don't understand why it's even referenced. But overall, basketball has remained, at least as far as I can tell, tethered to points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, steals per game, blocks per game, and then like total score.
Yeah, and people gravitate towards WAR because it's kind of, the acronym sounds nice, wins above replacement.
I've never seen that mentioned.
Yeah.
Particularly on like a broadcast. Like Chris Webber doesn't even seem to really grasp like plus minus or off and on stats. And this is not an attack on Chris Webber. I'm just saying
easy.
When he's tried to describe it, he hasn't really shown that he has any interest in that stat.
And nor should he, because he's like an ex-player who was amazing, and it doesn't behoove him to like get interested in this stuff. The incentive is not for him.
I'm not letting him off the hook that easy. I'm just saying,
sure.
It's not that he's ignorant about the game. He just clearly is not interested in that stat enough to even figure out what it is in a way that he can casually reference it in an accurate fashion. He just doesn't care. And I think that's kind of the standard for a lot of people who are on a large platform in broadcasting or analysis. They just don't care about those numbers enough to even cite them or really understand them. It's not that these people are dumb. It's not that they don't understand the game. They just don't have any interest outside of those kind of, fundamental pillars of stats.
Yeah, and it's almost a red pill, blue pill situation. And no sin bin, I watch a ton of baseball, and I'm a coastal elite. I live in New York, so I watch a ton of New York teams and Mets and Yankees broadcasts. And there's a few guys on both of those sides that really love advanced analytics. Like David Cohn talks about exit velo, the speed at which a ball leaves a bat on contact. He accepts the idea of shifts. He accepts the idea that closers should start games instead of end games. He's very much into it, and he gets pushback from the guys as a narrative, but slowly but surely they're showing new advanced stats on TV in baseball. So instead of just seeing batting average and strikeouts and home runs and RBIs, now we're seeing slugging percentage, which is like a different way to talk about what kind of hits you get instead of a single is the same as a home run.
So let me ask you a question about non-baseball here. Is the NBA intentionally not introducing those stats on television? Because they've put all those stats up on the internet. They're there. The NBA has been very, very enthusiastic about deep metrics and lineups and play types and all this stuff. You can get it on NBA.com. They have.
Teams
everything.
have it. Teams have it printed out after every quarter.
But teams have it, of course. But the NBA has made it public so that you can just deep dive as much as you want for hours on end into very arcane and specific statistics. But the product that they're putting on television doesn't include that. Is it intentional?
Yeah, I think this is fumes of David Stern, because his he was gifted Michael Jordan and these superstars in his time, and he created the whole idea of the NBA as entertainment for families with dancers and music and DJs, and he wanted all these things to be a part of the experience that is kind of unique, to be honest. Like, we take it for granted, but it's like a circus show. There's t-shirt cannons, and this is all on purpose. And I think the NBA itself accepts advanced analytics because all you have to do is go to their website, and I'm like, this is almost as good as any resource online, and they provide it as the source. But as a watching experience, I expected something by 2019 to develop that hasn't, which is like an alternative broadcast, where it would be like, if you wanted more information, you could just tune into this channel and it would have a ticker. Just something that offers a fan a different experience with just a different channel.
Well, the Clippers are attempting that, right? They created exactly what you're describing, where it's all about advanced analytics, and a guy will be dribbling the basketball, and you'll see his scoring percentage fluctuate as he moves around the court. He gets to one spot as he releases the ball. There's like 43% on that release. So they're attempting to do this. I guess I'm just now thinking about it because I've always wondered why there wasn't more of a rise of that vocabulary within the broadcasts themselves. But maybe it comes back to, look, if you're really into basketball, you've got League Pass, you're on NBA.com, you're sifting through these stats, you're a dork, you love that shit. You're good. They already have you in the fold. They're not trying to alienate someone who just wants to watch LeBron James play. And they want to hear, like, he wants it enough. He's locked in. Like, they don't want to give people stuff that might confuse them.
And let's just look at it as a thing that you experience. It takes up too much airtime to talk about these numbers and too much spatial time if we're giving screen space to a set of numbers that you don't even necessarily want to see. So let's say it's like a heated game. It's like a one possession game going into the fourth. Me and you are already part of the converted. Like, we love advanced analytics, so more is always more. We love it. But as I'm watching this game happen in real time, I'm like, don't tell me. I know Willie Cauley-Stein's off on. I just want to see him play. It takes up too much time, sort of like we're doing a podcast. You can't have 4 people talking at once.
Right. If you're the NBA, it's advantageous to have a bigger tent for people who just want to turn on a game and watch a team and watch action and elite athletes who are built like Hercules, jumping and running and doing really cool stuff without the confusion of metrics that they don't understand or numbers that don't seem to apply to what they're watching in the game. And maybe baseball screwed up in this regard. Maybe baseball should not have introduced those numbers, because I will admit, when I turn on a game and I see them mentioning things, I don't follow baseball. I don't really know what like OPS is. I don't really know these things like exit velocity. I can understand them if you describe them, but as a very, 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 very casual to almost non-baseball fan, when there's a game on in the bar, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about half the time.
Yeah, you want the blue pill when it comes to baseball, and you have to speak to your audience. And I definitely think advanced analytics fans are in the minority.
Like, tell me, does this catcher want it enough? Is he framing pitches in a way that makes it clear that he wants that ball to be a strike?
And that is infinitely more fun than being like, he's successful 15% of this time with a left-handed pitcher during the day.
Right. The television broadcast is for boomers and people who want narratives and people who are at the bar, and the NBA trusts that the dorks will go hard on the website and ingest the numbers and argue about them in their own circles. So maybe the NBA is smart here. Like, let Shaquille O'Neal and Chris Webber and former players bark about dudes who don't have heart and should have, that didn't have the Kobe Dober Mamba ideology, that Mamba blood coursing through their veins. And then, the dweebs can do their own thing.
Well, I'm conflicted about this. Let's bring it back to whist, because the calls that we remember the most are like the most poetic and emotional calls. Like, I can't believe what I just saw, the Kirk Gibson home run. Or like Mike Breen being like, bang. Like, these are things that we'll remember from a game that I don't want to be mucked up with analytics. And so this goes back to maybe I was thinking about this Andrew Luck thing that happened this week. A star quarterback who's been often injured retires in his prime, and people were just running for hyperbole. And it's like, oh, these arrows, first they broke his body, then they broke his heart, and it was a bit much. It was a bit too full of whist, right? Like, it was almost my parents. I could hear my parents just being like, stop that. Just talk about what you see, not how you feel all the time. And there's kind of aligning yourself or figuring out how to parse that is the art form of it. And I think people who call games are talented in ways that are very impressive. Like Mike Breen is such a good announcer because he knows how to give you certain things at certain times. And you don't want to hear a running ticker of like efficiency. You don't want to hear someone talk about D'Angelo Russell stepping on the court as a Golden State Warrior and immediately salt it, being like, he's actually not a very good player. You want to hear someone being like, he was an all-star last year, let's see what he got.
The Andrew Luck situation is interesting because as someone who detests football morally and ethically, I don't understand why anyone would object to any player in the NFL walking away from the game. He has money, and maybe he will keep parts of his health. Maybe his brain won't deteriorate later in life from the abuse that he's taken. But at any rate, I don't understand how there can be an iota of scorn for anyone who decides that the NFL is not what they want to do.
Well, I love leading with skepticism for everything, and my first skeptical thought would be, yeah, of course the boomer take would be, he quit on us, he doesn't want it enough, he's rich, how he has all this money, how dare he, if I was him, all these mistakes that we make. But then the response online was pretty singular in that people were really supporting him and his millennial ways of being like, I'm not happy anymore. My body's broken. My mind is broken. Like, I just want to enjoy my life now. I'm old enough. I've given you enough, and it's time to go. I wish it wasn't this, but it is. And then I became skeptical of people supporting him too, because there's so many different traps we can fall in, and there's players in the NBA and NFL that walk away from the game that don't get this treatment and don't get this forgiveness. For example, Larry Sanders in the NBA. For example, Royce White in the NBA. People still think he's just a dick. And he might be, but he has a point with mental illness that we're not paying attention to. And we do that because he sounds articulate. He sounds passionate. He looks healthy. He's young. He plays in the big three. But he's talking to us about this nuance that we will never be able to understand. And I think we should apply that both ways.
Well, Royce White is a completely fascinating case because he's absolutely a dick. And it's hard to know where his dickishness begins and his mental health ends, or vice versa, however you want to balance those two things. Like,
this will be a problem moving
have
forward with
anxiety,
everything.
would he be such a dick? Maybe so. Maybe he'd be more of a dick if he didn't have anxiety. But maybe he wouldn't be at all. I have no idea. But he's a great example of this dynamic.
And let's take CTE into account. And this is the thing that Andrew Luck is trying to avoid, brain injury. Maybe 20 or 30 years ago, people took smelling salts on the sidelines, and brain damage wasn't in the forefront of behavioral observation. Like, when someone does something odd as a football player, you're like, is this his intent or is he brain damaged? And I think that's a legitimate thing to always think about. What if in basketball, hypothetically, something that we're not seeing now is affecting these players in a way? For example, practicing too hard, maybe social media. Like, whatever your bias is, you're gonna want to move in that direction. Like, Kevin Durant being on social media has ruined him as a real player because he worries about how people feel about him and not what he does on the court, for example, something like that. Therefore, he joins Golden State Warriors and ruins basketball. Whatever. You can frame it in all these ways.
Kevin Durant joined Golden State because he suffers from whatever sort of mental illness
Right.
that
However we diagnose social media
right, that
disorder,
he, in order
moving
to
forward.
feel good about himself and to maintain some semblance of sanity and happiness, he had to join Golden State Warriors, which is kind of, but also
Ridiculous
it's
sounding
kind
now,
of
but
true, right?
yeah.
I mean, he didn't find his happiness, but he thought it would make him happy, and he made a decision that he thought would be best for him as a person. And we can ridicule that, but it's not that far removed from Royce White saying, I can't get on a plane.
And how we react to these
I'm saying
things tells so much
To
about
be clear, I'm
ourselves
not
as a
saying
community.
they're the same, but they're not incredibly different. If someone's saying, for my mental health, I need to chase a ring, I'm just not happy unless I get a championship. We're like, well, grow up. That's goofy, but that still is who they are.
And Royce White, if Royce White just framed his dilemma differently or his disorder differently to us and said, I'm a very emotional person, I'm depressed, I don't like to be on the road that much, I don't like to be away from my friends and family who give me the support for me to be happy, so I'm going to have issues flying across the country without my support group, I just don't want to go. Like, that to me is
I
very
just don't
human
have a
and
problem
legitimate.
with anybody quitting any job at any time if they feel like it. I like the idea that fans can be disappointed makes sense. You wanted to root for the guy, you liked him, you brought his jersey, you were invested in his success, you argued at the bar about this guy being good, and you took his side, and then he quits and you're annoyed. But again, grow up, man. Like, guys can, like, just
Yeah.
because you quit your job at the Staples fucking customer service center and no one made a big deal about it on, ESPN, doesn't mean that you have the right to change up your surroundings and these guys don't. I mean, obviously, like, I'm not
Exactly,
even,
and-
it sounds like I'm talking to children. Like, who gives a fuck if someone quits their job?
Yeah, and sports vitriol has been around for generations, and how we look at things is really interesting. And your distaste for the NFL is real. I get that. I love it. It's been part of my life. I love to see something with a ton of hypocrisy play out. It's not perfect by any
Wow,
means.
really going on a
And,
limb. The NFL is
collect-
not perfect. Andrew Quo.
Yeah, but also you want to go into the
We
bullshit,
go into the bullshit
of the NBA,
all the
like,
time. Because
what do we
this
do?
is a basketball podcast.
But that's what I mean. But like, immediately, no sin bin. But this is irrelevant to our conversation last time about the project the New York Times did about race. And Andrew Luck looks a certain way. And I'm reaching a bit here, but no one's talking about this at all. We've always talked about the white quarterback being like the most protected athlete in all of sports. And Andrew Luck is a white quarterback. And we're currently giving two running backs a really hard time, or a wide receiver and a running back, Ezekiel Elliott and Antonio Brown, because they don't like the way things are going down with their contract or equipment. They don't want to practice. It's dangerous. They're older now. Like, they know they're not going to be protected by the league, so they decided they're good enough to protect themselves. And we criticize them as a community. If you just turn on the TV, everyone's just like, what's wrong with Antonio Brown? Is he not grateful? But we don't do that with Andrew Luck, and it's very noticeable to me.
That
but
makes
no one's
total
talking about
sense.
it.
I would not contest that in the least. I also know where I would stand on all of these cases you're describing. So you can not include me in your
Exactly.
royal
I mean, we're part of
about
the
the people who are who are supporting Andrew Luck and
I
not
say-
these other
yeah.
dudes who want to walk away from the
Yeah.
sport for whatever reason. Because I encourage everyone on every level to quit football immediately before your brain turns to mush.
Hey, man, me and you have bought tickets to boxing matches, so, like, I don't know.
Boxing isn't. This is true.
We enjoy
And
things.
again, hypocrisy. It's a
we-
great form of intellectual freedom, but boxing is not propagated as
Right.
the most American sport. It is not.
It used to be until it changed, and football will change too. Ali was the biggest
Yes,
athlete
and I
of
think
all
boxing
time until
is now in its proper context. It's blood sport like MMA. It takes a psychopath to want to do that on a professional level, and people who are incredibly desperate. And I wish they didn't have to do that and they had more options. But football is...
And we paid good money to
yes,
see
but
Golovkin, and we were
is
happy
still
about that last
portrayed
year.
as patriotism and part of American manhood in a way that boxing, as you pointed out, used to be and is no longer positioned. And football should
football
be
is
positioned
changing.
as blood sport, and you should be a pariah if you are like advocating for young men to earn their stripes as individuals and patriots by playing this sport.
I mean, hypocrisy will just like uncover more hypocrisy, so we don't want to get into this too much, but I disagree in the sense that like we cannot have the same amount of anger for this thing subjectively as we do for a lot of other things. It's sort of like the plastic straw phenomenon. It's like, I'm saving the environment, no plastic straw for me, as we drive cars. As we use Uber.
But that falls into the whole thing of like...
goes down a slippery
you don't
slope.
like this element of society, and yet you live within it. But it's like...
Sure.
We can say, yeah, boxing is a dangerous, violent sport that can literally kill you. But you don't have... But you don't have...
football too.
80 kids in every high school in America trying out for the professional boxing team.
Well, we don't have football's dying. Like we know Pee Wee football is no longer a thing because all these NFL players are saying they don't want their kids to play. The NBA is reaping benefits from this. And not to get too much into football, but, the NBA is a product of a system that is rooted in the NCAA. And let's talk about that. It's like, where's your poison?
We
Pick
should
your
get rid
poison.
of the NCAA too. I'm fine with that.
No, I don't. And we
no,
watch
I
those
don't.
games,
Stop
and
it.
March Madness
Stop
makes the most.
including me in all your moral morasses. I don't watch the NFL and I don't watch college basketball. Stop including me in your conflicted group.
Listen, Mr. 60 degrees while sleeping at night.
I didn't say I was perfect.
We all have our things.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about with you, because you are a huge Jeremy Lin fan. You have made artwork that's about Jeremy Lin.
Oh, yeah.
That was an important part
Still do, yeah.
in your life as someone in New York City and as a fan of the game, to see an Asian man on the biggest stage, the mecca of basketball, and the biggest story in all of sports. And a few days ago, Lin announced that he was going to play next season with the Beijing Ducks in China. And I think there are various discussion points here, but I guess just to start it off, what's your reaction to seemingly his NBA career reaching a point where it might be over?
I'm happy for him because it seemed like it was over. He wasn't good anymore, and injuries kind of zap potentiality, and Dwight Howard is going through this. It's unfortunate. I wish he never got seriously hurt when he was with the Nets, and that seems to be the lingering injury. But I'm happy for him that he came out on the other side, and I don't believe the whole tears thing. I think he was performing in a good way for an audience that we kind of picked on him for. And I think he's very sad that he's not still in the NBA, but he's with the Beijing Ducks. He's with his brother in the same league, his little brother. I'm happy for him, and there's no telling that he might not even return to the NBA later.
What irked me was that there was a certain segment of NBA fans who seemed to root against Jeremy Lin, dating back to Linsanity.
Oh,
I mean, look, we all have our agendas, right?
You don't say.
And no, it could be anything, and you stick to your guns.
Very
if
much
you're
so,
someone who
yeah.
thinks Kobe sucks, you generally stay with the Kobe sucks thing for your entire life, and you take advantage of every opportunity to make it clear that you were right, or to prove a point. And look, this is part of being a fan and having interests that are outside of even a specific team. So Jeremy Lin clearly had people who said, this guy's overrated, he's not that good, during Linsanity. And they've spent the last, 7-8 years, whenever it's going back to that, a decade, proving that point and arguing that Jeremy Lin, in fact, as they said at the moment, is not that good. So there's a segment of the population that was rooting against a guy who was on the fringes of the league and is now maybe claiming victory at this point.
Yeah, because he survived a long time, even though he believes he still has a lot of game left in him. To me, he doesn't have much more to prove. He's not a Hall of Famer. He's not a max contract. He's not a really great contract guy. He signed that one contract with Maury, but he lasted in the league, and I'm really proud to be Asian American and talk about Jeremy Lin always. And I think America as a culture doesn't really take Asian men that seriously, as we're finding out with Andrew Yang and the criticism with him. And he embraces it in a fun way, in the same way Jeremy Lin embraces his ethnicity and talking about it, especially every time you ask him about his haircut, he talks about identity and the way people are allowed to shape the way people perceive them. And I'm happy for him. He did it. Would I have liked to have seen him ride the bench with the Knicks this year in relegation? Definitely. That would have been more fun than having him go away, but I'm definitely going to watch some Beijing Ducks
Can you
games. That's gonna be
contextualize a
fun.
little bit what it meant to see an Asian man in the Garden hitting those knockdown shots with people going nuts and the front page of every paper being about Linsanity? What was that like for you, as an Asian man and a basketball nut?
I mean, I was there for 2 of those games, and I cry a lot, but
was
it was one of those
wistful
moments.
For these moments?
I was wistful a second after it
Oh,
happened.
you remember that shot that just went in?
Yeah, exactly. Yo, literally. I can't really describe how much it affected me because, you have to frame it with me growing up in New York as a Knicks fan. I'm Taiwanese American. This guy kind of is much taller, much bigger than me, but reminds me of me, as a hubris thing. And to watch him succeed on that level for so long, I think Linsanity was actually a really long run, a big enough sample size where we can legitimately say he was really, really good for those games. It was something like the universe acknowledging that I existed. Within the microcosm of the NBA universe and the New York universe. And there's that famous New Yorker cartoon cover where New York is in the middle of the map, and then Russia's off there and China's off there. It's a little thing, and that's sometimes how the NBA world feels. I'm how can you not have a LeBron James take? It's I don't watch the NBA. I'm how is this possible? And so within the microcosm of my world that feels really big, having this guy being the center of it was not only emotional. It felt like I wasn't invisible anymore.
Was it different with him than Yao Ming?
Very much so, because not only was Yao Ming from China and not an American-born Asian person, he was 7 feet tall, and I loved Yao Ming so much, and it was a tragedy that he went down so early in his career. But it's different because he had physical attributes that made him unique, and the framing around him was he's a freak of nature. They plucked him out of this country with billions of people, and he's the one guy who can play in the NBA, as opposed to Jeremy Lin, who's kind of not the shortest guard in the world, but he looked like someone you would
Jeremy
have
Lin
drinks with.
In a normal context is a big dude. He's 6'3", 6'4", but in the league,
Yes.
he's even a slightly biggish guard in the NBA. But amongst the trees and the redwoods and the Goliaths, he was certainly not a specimen in the way that Yao Ming was. Yao Ming wasn't a guy who was different, and then he was different. Secondly, yeah, I mean, he was not only was he Chinese, but he was from China, but he was a freak, to use a word that sounds pejorative, but in the same way as anyone who's 7'6" in the league, even in the league of absolute giants. Those guys like Sean Bradley, George Murasan, what's our guy, Tobias Harris's buddy? What's his
Bogdan? No.
Boban, yeah. Sorry,
Boban.
But anyway, those
yeah.
guys are even different than NBA guys. And Jeremy Lin was
And-
not. Jeremy Lin was a normal human.
Yeah, especially optically on the court. And back to the Yao Ming thing, not only was he unique in terms of his physicality, he was unique in terms of what kind of player he was. So all of a sudden you had this like extremely skilled shooter playing in an era where fives were asked to block shots, which he did, defend, and dunk. But then he kind of like stepped back and showed you like this beautiful thing, and we thought we were watching an evolution. So Yao Ming, shout out to Yao Ming, one of my favorite.
In an era when fives were encouraged to shoot threes, he would have been an absolute monster. A guy who could have protected the rim and pulled opposing big men out of the paint. I will say his foot speed was not great. And he is someone that would have been picked on quite a bit by really fast guards because he was in the era before the kind of intense targeting that happens today was going on. But I still think he would have been a really exciting player in the contemporary NBA.
Yeah, I mean, you plop him down into 2019, and he's a completely different beast. And same with like a player like Rick Smits, who I really enjoyed, who had the same skills that Yao Ming did. To listen to Jeff Van Gundy talk about Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming is like one of my favorite things, because not only is Jeff Van Gundy funny and articulate, he loved that team so much, and he kept on saying like there was no reason this team couldn't win multiple championships. We just didn't. And it's kind of like a weird mind fuck. And especially today after Kobe comes out and says like we could have won 12 championships if Shaquille O'Neal wanted it more. It's such an odd thing to
That was
parse,
the exact
right?
parallel that I was about to get to, because it's the idea of championships that you should have had. Like the Sixers should have had a championship this year. There's
Oh, what do you mean should have? They won one. They have.
Kevin Durant has none.
Ben Simmons has won. Kevin Durant has.
But
exactly.
in
True.
the way that
Look it up.
Kobe, who is the most self-mythologizing guy maybe in NBA history, MJ maybe more so, but Kobe is just outrageous with it. Any compliment he has for any player
it's amazing.
is always cloaked in like myself or other than me, and it reminds me of it's really wild.
He's a gaslighter. He's the original NBA
And
gaslight.
to even today, his hierarchy on the NBA all-time list is really just based on the fact that he won a bunch of championships. And the fact that he won a bunch of championships is not only a testament to his excellence, but of course to his teammates around him. And he has been single-minded in his emphasis that he is the key, in fact, to those championships. And to have him still years later talking about Shaquille O'Neal and how Shaq in some way denied Kobe the glory that Kobe should have had, it's pretty
maniacal.
It's
messianic.
It's also Kobe seeing himself disappearing slightly into the sands of time. Well,
oh man, who's wistful
Kobe is.
now?
But it's Kobe looking at it and saying,
That's right.
"Oh man, people are still putting LeBron ahead of me. People are saying Kawhi Leonard's better than me. Wait a minute, I could have had 12, dude. I could have had 12. I could have had more than Bill Russell. Like, my ranking here on championships is a fraction of what it actually could have been. Like, what Kobe was able to do would have been double the championships."
Yeah, and he called out Shaquille O'Neal, and he backtracked, be like, "Oh, I think he could have been the greatest of all time. We could have been talking about him as the GOAT if he just worked as hard as I did," which was hilarious, which is such a put down. And of course, the first thing I do is I'm like, why does Kobe think this? Not only was he very good, like he's a very, very, very good player on the level of
Look,
Armando
Kobe is
Ginobili
a
or
top
something.
45 player. He's a top 50 player. He's one of the top 100 NBA players who's ever laced up a pair of shoes.
Triple doubles, Ricky Davis, Kobe Bryant. Who has more? But so he plays for, and I love LA so much, but I say this with confidence, maybe one of the worst fan bases in all of sports, akin to like the Patriots fan base, because they had Magic Johnson and Kareem and Worthy and all those successful teams, and you just shape your experience a certain way.
Think
like
of
Lakers,
all
baby,
the championships
Kobe's,
Monte Ellis could have had if Steph Curry had learned to share the ball.
But then Kobe's confirmation is not only the fan base, but also his peers, because his peers definitely respect him. Everybody who talks about Kobe is very flowery in their description of what he is. And they put him in the same place that Kobe puts himself. But we're not asking for what other players think, because we've figured out what other players think is really kind of subjective, and it's based off of not the right voice. If we want to get towards empirical, good, bad stuff,
without delving
which
fully
we never
into
do.
the pathology of Kobe Bryant, it is. I wonder what it's like to have spent your entire working career as concerned about legacy as he clearly was. That was everything to him. And that was why even when they had an incredibly talented roster, he would take all the shots. He would be the one who would pout if it was suggested that he might pass more to his talented teammates. Because to him, this was always about building the resume and the all-time like legacy of Kobe. So to see other players going up those to different plateaus, and then the natural sort of decline that your relevancy has as a retired player. You know, if you're RJ Barrett and you're 19 years old, you haven't right.
Maple
they can
Mamba.
call him the Maple Mamba, but he was 12 years old when Kobe blew out his Achilles. You know, this younger generation, they know his reputation. They know he was great, but they don't remember seeing Kobe at the height of his powers. So there's also the natural decline of people who have seen you and people who
Memory.
can talk about you accurately. And it kind of goes back to Stephen A. Smith saying, oh, well, unless you're over 30, you can't even talk about MJ. And it's like, you know, Kobe's not that far behind that. You know, unless you're over 22,
and
unless you're over 25, you can't talk about Kobe. Like, time marches onward.
And Kobe's done such a great job of staying present. And I know where you're going with this, with the actors of yesteryear. They were the biggest Hollywood actors, but we can barely remember their names, let alone their movies or roles. And it kind of like fades, like in the way an actor like De Niro kind of fades out of our consciousness and gravity. But Shaq doesn't. And Shaq has been a part of the NBA ecosystem consistently in a way that I think drives Kobe nuts. So Shaq clapped back. He says, "You would have had 12 if you passed the ball more, especially in the finals against the Pistons." Facts. So in the finals, Kobe shot in the 5 games 10 for 27, 14 for 27, 4 for 13, 8 for 25, 7 for 21. This is why I love NBA Twitter, because there's ways to just talk about this without arguing and like trying to make someone mad for another reason.
For sure. And I like that there's pushback from Shaq on this. Granted, those two have had a rivalry going back for decades that has included,
Tell me how my ass
analingus.
tastes.
So, you know, this is a real rivalry. It's very millennial in its emphasis on ass eating, despite the fact that both of them are boomers.
Hey. Right. I mean, I love that Kobe does this. I'm grateful that Kobe does this because he gives us fuel to talk about stuff that is relevant now. How you frame a game and how maybe we're framing LeBron James wrong because Ray Allen hit that shot and it changed the trajectory of LeBron James's career. If he misses that prayer of a shot on the baseline, we're talking about a different LeBron James. And I say the royal we. I want to clarify the royal we because I always say I because I have too much bias as I. When I say we, I mean like what I think is like the summary or the summation of like analysis in Twitter.
But Kobe's legacy is the same way. You know, he had a terrible game against Boston. What did he shoot? 8 of 24 or whatever it was. and he got like a bullshit rip through call and got 3 foul shots late that helped cement that game. And I believe Ron Artest got hot and hit like 2 threes or something. And anyway, I'm saying his legacy without Shaq was in jeopardy in that moment too. And he came through, and like the team dragged him despite a poor performance to a ring. And no one says, well, Kobe didn't deserve that championship. We acknowledge that he shot poorly and that he was not an efficient shooter and that he shot too much. But like all these legacies, you can sort of find a moment where, like Jordan, the best example. We view him making that basket against Brian Russell as something that a champion would do, and that Michael Jordan was able to do that. But like, he might have missed that shot if Karl Malone hadn't missed on a prior one. Jordan made these plays, but like those are also coin tosses.
Yeah, I love this, and I love talking about how we forget players like Tim Duncan. And someone who loves Kobe might say, well, when has Tim Duncan ever hit a game-winning shot? I'm like, he didn't need to. He was just winning by like 6 points the whole time. We frame these things because this is the dribble bias thing at its core. We see Kobe in these tough situations all the time. He fails more than he succeeds, much more. But when he does, it looks amazing. There's so much gravity behind it that it sticks in our memory. Not the time he airballs it. Be like, he'll get him next time. He's good at this.
The NBA has fostered this idea of memories and moments, and that's not stuff that analytics necessarily convey. And it's about that shot that Kobe hit over 3 guys, and that's why you watch the game. And sure, the rest of us can say, yeah, but Kobe shot like 26% on game-winning attempts and was actually bad at that. Whatever, that's not the exact number, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. He was a poor shooter. He took really difficult shots with a lot of defenders on him, but he made those ones that we will remember.
Yeah, and a lot of the times this comes down to just argumentative skills, which is a bummer. And I try to stay away from Twitter. That's just people like lawyers basically trying to prove their case. But there's certain gotcha moments, and especially with people who claim, for example, Michael Jordan is perfect in the finals. It's like, well, what about all those years he didn't make the finals? He got booted by like a Knicks team one year. We don't talk about that because we isolate the thing that supports our argument, and as soon as we hear like this standard rebuttal, it just like dissolves.
And also with someone like Kobe, if maybe Tracy McGrady should have been more invested in his own legend. And Tracy McGrady for a couple seasons was arguably, in my belief, better than Kobe Bryant. But, he got injured,
Definitely.
Things didn't work out, and Kobe made sure, and part of it was just the good fortune of playing with Shaquille O'Neal, but Kobe did make sure that his legend was etched in stone. And it might not have worked out that way, but it did. And someone like T-Mac does not have that legacy and will not be remembered in the same fashion, despite being an equivalent basketball player.
And despite being still around the NBA, doing shows and interacting with us, and he's kind of great at it, and he's still present and has a gravity that Kobe, I'm sure, wouldn't want to stoop down to, but really desires. And to talk about desire, like, I want to talk about the Shaq thing, about how he quote-unquote didn't want it enough. And I always think about Vince Carter when he played Allen Iverson in the conference finals, and he went to, I believe, UNC to get his diploma, like the morning before the game. And he lost that game 7, and everyone blamed him for not being focused. And everyone has a point. Like, what are you doing traveling on a plane hours before you're playing the biggest game of your career? We assume you're going to have more moments like that, but he ends up not having them. That is the defining moment of his career. Did that trip to
North Carolina for the graduation ceremony have any effect on his performance? Probably not. But like, who's to say?
We'll never know.
Who's to say his?
Well, I would say probably
his leg wasn't slightly
we'll
stiffer
never know.
than it would have been, and his shot was errant at the buzzer or whenever that late attempt was.
I think in 2019 we'd see that scenario. If you were a Raptors general manager, you'd be like, I would really strongly suggest against this, and I would really strongly suggest we not even practice this week during the finals. It was a different time where people thought like, you'll just sleep on the plane. Now we know like no one gets rest if they travel, and things get framed differently. So he wanted it more. He wanted that diploma more, and he thought he would have more opportunities in his career.
A worthless sheet of paper from the University of North Carolina, more than he wanted an NBA championship. And that's what separates Kobe from Vince Carter. Kobe never went to school.
What? It would have been great if Kobe went at Shaq and said, "Oh, you were so focused on being a cop the whole time. You should have been focused on playing ball instead. All this cop business."
That would be a good.
That would have been fun.
Or being a genie. You spent all that time practicing somehow getting yourself into a small bottle, and then emerging from it and riding around on Persian rugs when you could have been working on your free throws.
You should have been concentrating on ball instead of making a legendary video game where you're a kung fu master.
Your rap career with the Fuschnicks stood in the way of our championship aspirations.
Boomer alert, that's the best NBA rap performance of all time, right?
Just
the most legitimate
True
one.
Fuschnick?
Well, something that was accepted by a broader audience than not just rap fans. That was a song that was on the radio.
Well, he was the number one pick, not Christian Laettner, not Alonzo Mourning. I would agree. I can't think of another basketball player who dropped a verse that was actually on a song that people enjoyed and wasn't listened to as a novelty.
What's taking Drake so long? How come a Raptor isn't just
RJ
in the
Barrett
background of
rapping
a song?
ad-libs.
It's funny that Drake has become the face of that championship. Everyone's like, well, Drake won one.
I mean, look, Drizzy's only been to
I
the
love
finals once, and he came home with a ring.
I mean, Kevin Durant has 0.
Him and
Drake
Ben
has
Simmons
1.
in lockstep with rings.
Do you think Durant's going to win one in Brooklyn?
I don't want to speculate about how good that Durant will ultimately be, but Brooklyn seemingly made a smart move in re-upping their often injured but talented guard, Karis LeVert, to which seems to be a reasonable contract, maybe underpriced considering what he would get in the open market, but reasonable for his injury history.
What is it? I don't have it in front of me. I think it's 16, 17, 18, those 3 years. There's a poison pill, right?
Believe it. I can't remember if it goes up or down, but that's around the money that we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a bargain. I mean, it makes me so
it's
worried.
3 years, $52.5 million.
That's good. That's a good value if he can play 60 games a season. Last year he played 40, I believe, and looked so good in those 40 games. And he's exactly what a hypothetical healthy 85% KD, Kyrie Irving, who's more injury prone than all three of them. And he's the perfect complement. He's not only a 3-and-D guy, he does something that we ask for on Cookies all the time, is defend, shoot threes, and do something else, and he's a playmaker. So he's a great investment on paper, but the Nets have really saddled themselves with very injury-prone guys, and I hate to go back into history, but these guys are going to break down at some point. Like, for example, Karis LeVert fell out of the lottery because of foot concerns, and those foot concerns ended up surfacing again last year. I believe it was a foot issue last year. So you confirm that fear that every team had in the draft. Giving him that money, I hate the idea of you have to do it, but no one is faulting them for
You're
doing
right.
it.
The Nets do have guys with scary injury histories. Kevin Durant is coming back from a potentially career-ending injury or career-threatening injury. Kyrie Irving has missed a lot of time, and
Never been
now
healthy.
you've got
Yeah.
a guy who had injuries in college and injuries as a pro. He had a gruesome broken leg, and amazingly Maybe it wasn't broken, but I forget the exact prognosis. But he had a terrible visual injury and then came back the same season and played. But what the Nets are doing in many ways is reminiscent of the Spurs, in which they were able to pay guys like Tony Parker and Manu and Tim Duncan less than they were worth. And that created a huge, enormous competitive advantage where other teams are paying guys market rate or even more than they're actually contributing on the court. And the Spurs were routinely paying less. So they were able to add more talent. And it's kind of cheating in a sense. I mean, it is cheating, and I don't mean it's unethical, but it's cheating. To have guys being paid less than they are worth gives you an enormous advantage against the opposition.
And that's why David Stern nixed the CP3 trade to LA Lakers, because he took less money and he thought it was cheating.
Yeah, and I think you can look at someone like Dirk Nowitzki, who took a lot less money than he had to, or excuse me, than he could have. And those advantages build up. And if the Spurs had to make tough choices about keeping all three of their guys together while still adding other talent, maybe they wouldn't have won all those rings. Who knows? But the Nets clearly have a front office that is populated by former Spurs, and this is what they're doing. So even if there's an injury risk, there's kind of an advantage to that, because all you have to do is get these guys healthy at the right time. And that's not easy to do. But if you have Dinwiddie on a cheap contract and you have LeVert on a cheap contract, and then you've got two max guys, suddenly you've got a lot of talent. And if
Jared Allen on a rookie deal.
Exactly. And they're doing the right thing as far as finding guys who are cheap but can contribute, and the Spurs have always done that as well. I guess what I'm saying is there's an advantage to the team of having someone like LeVert break his leg last year. And I know that's a gross way of looking at it, and there is an injury risk, but they're also paying less for a guy who could have potentially commanded $25 million a year and is taking, $9 million less because he's been hurt.
That was the potentiality of the Porzingis injury in New York. I thought he would come at a discount because of that horrible injury. It turns out things unfolded in a different way. But you're right. And that's how you get a Karis LeVert. That's how the Knicks get Latrell Sprewell. Something happens and it devalues him, and he just becomes available or he becomes cheap. And I love Karis LeVert, and I love what the Nets did. I believe in what Joseph Tsai does with corporations, and he's structuring it with risk, but not that much risk with this specific contract. I am not jealous of this team. I'm not jealous of this fan base if they have one. I just think this has a lot of opportunity to go wrong in the same way the Lakers have structured their risk for this next season. But
at the same time, if it goes right, they are a contender. It's that
100.
simple.
And show me another Karis LeVert on the market for that cheap.
There isn't one.
Exactly.
So if you look at that team and you say you have Dinwiddie, LeVert, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant.
Jared Allen. I love Jared Allen.
Good player too.
Yeah.
But those four, and again, I like him, but those four are as good as any four on any team in the league right now, if healthy.
Yeah.
And that's a gamble you can take.
Yeah.
Are they better than Simmons, Horford, Embiid, Tobias Harris, or Josh Richardson? I don't know. They're in the conversation. Again, we don't know what Durant will look like, but they are in the game in terms of winning a championship, and not that many teams are.
As soon as one of those four go down, the probability of you being a champion is like gone, right? So you're playing. It's almost like roulette, and they have 4 bullets in the chamber, and this is something that the Knicks would have done. This is the team that the Knicks would have put together 5 years ago with slightly better players. I love all these players quite a bit. But, in my opinion, I think Durant is too big of a risk. I think Kyrie, you do it in a second, no matter what. And Karis LeVert, you got to really think about that, I think. And I would have come out on the end that they did, but I would not have a full night's sleep all season if I were the Nets.
But my thing is, they don't have to be healthy all the time. They don't have to be. They have to be healthy in the playoffs.
Yeah,
and they have to be healthy in the playoffs at some point. It doesn't have to be this year. It doesn't have to be in 2 years. At just some point, you have to get all these guys healthy together. And I don't think that's as challenging a task as saying, well, these guys have got to be healthy for 82 games.
I mean, we just saw the Golden State Warriors play the whole season with that principle, and it blew up on them. And I think all something has to happen is Kevin Durant not to feel right in a first-round playoff series against the Sixers, and then it's just over. The East is not that terrible, where I think every step of the way in the playoffs, if they're going to go on to win a championship in 2 years when Durant's healthy, is challenging. I don't think it's a gimme that they get all these four guys on the court and they take a healthy Sixers team.
Maybe not, but I think if you're trying to win championships, there are certain dice that you have to roll, and injuries are one of them because
it's win now. I mean, Durant's win now. You have to do it.
But like the Achilles thing is just a different discussion because that's such a grievous injury. But look, yeah, the Warriors were torn asunder by injuries, but that wasn't something you could have predicted either. You know, Steph Curry, the guy who had a troubling injury history, was fine. But Kevin Durant was the one who got an Achilles injury out of nowhere. Klay Thompson blew out his ACL, and he was an Iron Man, more or less. So, you know, those injuries are inherent in trying to build a championship team.
But you're just talking about results. You know, this is just probability speaking. Yeah, there's a 70% chance that Steph Curry is going to be reasonably healthy. That 30% chance didn't hit. The 10% chance that Durant wasn't healthy happened. The 5% chance that Klay Thompson is out for the season happened. All these things aren't arithmetic. They all kind of geometrically form like risk, right? Because they compile onto each other. And the Nets are exciting, but we won't know what this looks like until 17 months, 18 months from now.
Absolutely.
And it's like, what I'm saying is I'm not jealous of their predicament. I think they're doing something exciting and they're part of the discussion in the future, moving forward, maybe. But right now they're not, and signing Caris LeVert is not controversial. But when you look at it deeper, it's very problematic.
I disagree. I don't think he's making that much money. I think he's a very good player. I don't think he's a star, but he's very good.
Yeah, he's worth that money.
You know, I don't understand.
But this is not
what you would advocate otherwise.
So I'm not saying this is an arithmetic risk. I think compiled upon all the other risks, it's just a lot at this point because there's risk in Kyrie that I'm fine with. There's risk in KD that I'm not that fine with. And now there's risk in Caris. All these three pieces have a risk potential that is greater than you'd be comfortable with.
Sure, that's true. But I feel like the Nets, because of their situation, were confronted by a path. And one of them could have been, we're going to stick with our young guys, and whether we keep Russell on a contract or not, we're going to keep our guys and try to build this together. But they risked becoming too good, but not good enough. And I understand when you have stars who are willing to come to your team, this was the only path in which the Nets were going to become a contender, like right now, and down in the next 3 or 4 years.
In a year. See, this is the irony of it. It's win now. I mean, a year from now, maybe. There's so many moving parts with this, and of course you keep Caris LeVert. He's a good one. I believe they let Rondae Hollis-Jefferson walk.
Caris LeVert, pre-injury,
he's a keeper.
He was the best player on that team. Like Dinwiddie's a good offensive player, but he can't defend.
He was better than D'Angelo Russell for sure.
Yeah, and then, you know, but none of those guys are superstars. They did not stumble into someone that you could build a franchise around, which necessitated either becoming bad and getting back in the lottery, packaging your young players for a superstar and not having the surrounding talent to make that team competitive with,
you-
say, an Anthony Davis, or signing those guys.
Yeah, and I think Karis LeVert has as much on-court value as Chris Middleton. Someone that is probably a little overrated now and overpaid now in terms of cap space. And you would trade your bevy of young players for someone like Karis LeVert. So you already have him. All I'm saying is that's going to be a shit show, man.
But the other thing is that none of these guys are immovable. And if Karis LeVert is healthy, that contract
But then you keep him.
You can keep him, or you can flip him for an even better star. And that's the advantage of having someone who's underpaid in a league where underpaying guys is hugely important. You know, if you're Philly, yeah, you could move Tobias Harris, but you got to take back someone else with a bloated contract because he's making $30-some million a year. He's maybe better than Karis LeVert, but he doesn't have the injury history, so the Sixers are able to pay him. The Sixers are forced to pay him twice as much as the Nets are for a guy who's probably in the same tier.
Agreed, but the Karis kind of operates differently as a thing because if he's healthy, you don't trade him because he's a good value. If he isn't healthy, you get underpaid for him in return. You can't get a superstar for a hurt Karis LeVert, I don't think. You have to sweeten the deal with picks or something.
Oh, for sure. Well, we really got into the Karis LeVert discussion in a way that I was not anticipating.
Because we were messing around with too much football, man.
Yeah, we talked about non-sports like football and baseball. We talked about mind hunting, too. More mind hunters. And finally, we got to talk about basketball.
Does it feel weird that we're going like back to school, quote unquote, next week, but the season's still far away? I feel like, all right, it's time to go. And I'm like, oh, we haven't even started with...
Oh, God, you're so wistful.
Dude, this is the whist-filled cookies.
And incidentally, a perfect pie.
I love cookies.
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 I love cookies. I love cookies.